Somewhere in the chain of command that connects the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to the ballistic missiles it fired at an American military installation in Jordan, someone made a calculation. They looked at the trajectory of this conflict, at weeks of American strikes accumulating across their coastline, at their radar networks going dark, at their underground facilities burning from the inside out, at their fast attack boats sitting at the bottom of the Persian Gulf, and they made a decision that every previous iteration of this regime had been careful to avoid. They decided to kill Americans. Not accidentally. Not as collateral damage in an operation aimed at something else, deliberately. With ballistic missiles targeted at a base where American service members were stationed, launched with the knowledge of exactly what they were firing at, and exactly what the consequences of a successful strike would be. 2 American service members are dead. A third is missing. 4 others were medically evacuated to Jordanian hospitals and have since been discharged. These are the 15th and 16th Americans killed in the Iran War, and the first to fall since the opening days of the conflict. And the IRGC, the institution that made the calculation that killing them was an acceptable operational choice, is now discovering what happens when that calculation turns out to be the most consequential mistake it has made since this conflict began. This changes everything. Not because American resolve was uncertain before these deaths. It was not. Not because the strike campaign against Iran was going to stop without this provocation. It was not. What changes is the nature of the American response, and the specific targets that are now in the crosshairs of a military operation that has shifted from degradation to retribution, from systematic dismantling to something that the IRGC's own strategic planners never fully incorporated into their doctrine of asymmetric deterrence. When American service members die, the institutional calculus of the American military does not soften. It hardens in ways that produce outcomes the adversary responsible for those deaths is never fully prepared to absorb. But let's back all the way up, because to understand why July the 17th, 2026 represents the most significant escalation threshold crossed in this entire confrontation, and why the American response that followed within hours was different in character from every previous round of strikes, you need to understand the full sequence of what the IRGC did on that day, what it hit beyond the American base in Jordan, and what the target list that the American military has now begun prosecuting tells you about where this conflict is heading in the coming days. The Iranian attack on the American installation in Jordan was not the only strike the IRGC launched in that operational window. Kuwait was hit hard simultaneously. The Kuwait National Petroleum Company North Pier crude oil export facility at the Mina Al Ahmadi hub was struck, with the facility catching fire and smoke visible on satellite imagery within hours. The damage to Kuwait was not limited to oil infrastructure. Buildings in Kuwait sustained direct impact, with windows blown out and roofs collapsed from the force of missile and drone strikes that came in consecutive waves. 2 of Kuwait's desalination plants were attacked in the preceding 48 hours. Kuwait operates 8 major desalination plants. Those plants provide 90% of the country's drinking water. The IRGC was not striking military targets and producing civilian collateral damage. It was deliberately targeting the infrastructure that the civilian population of Kuwait depends on for survival. The drinking water of an entire country's civilian population was the chosen target of an institution that simultaneously claims to be the legitimate administrator of maritime security in the Persian Gulf. Read that combination together, because it is the combination that reveals what the IRGC's strategic posture has become. Killing American service members in Jordan, burning Kuwait's oil export infrastructure, attacking the desalination plants that provide 90% of Kuwait's drinking water. These are not the actions of a military organization operating within any framework of military necessity or proportionality. They are the actions of an institution that has decided, under the accumulated pressure of weeks of American strikes on its military capacity, that the only remaining tool available to it is the infliction of maximum civilian suffering on the countries hosting American forces, combined with the targeting of American military personnel directly, in the hope that the combination of civilian suffering and American casualties produces the political pressure on Washington that its military operations have completely failed to generate. The IRGC's theory of how this ends has always been anchored to American political will, specifically to the belief that American domestic politics would eventually generate pressure on the administration to stop the strikes and negotiate on terms more favorable to Tehran than the military situation warranted. This theory required American casualties to be part of the pressure calculation. A war in which only Iranians die does not generate the domestic American political pressure that the IRGC was counting on. A war in which Americans are coming home in caskets, in which American families are getting the call that the casualty notification officer is at the door, in which the names of the dead are being read on the floor of Congress, generates a very different domestic political dynamic that the IRGC believed would eventually force the administration toward an exit. The theory was wrong, not because American domestic politics does not respond to military casualties. It does. but because the specific political dynamic that American casualties in this conflict are generating is not the anti-war pressure the IRGC's planners expected. It is the demand that the institution responsible for those deaths be held accountable in ways that are visible, unmistakable, and permanent. The political pressure that the deaths of American service members in Jordan is generating in Washington is not pressure to stop. It is pressure to finish, and the American military's response within hours of the casualties being confirmed is the most direct possible evidence of which direction that political pressure is pointing. American ATACMS missiles were fired at Iranian targets. Army Tactical Missile System, a precision long-range ballistic missile fired from ground-based launch platforms, adding a land-fired precision strike dimension to the American response package that the IRGC's existing air defense architecture was not optimized to engage simultaneously with the carrier-based air and naval Tomahawk strikes that have been the primary strike tools throughout this campaign. Heavy fighter jet activity over Bandar Abbas, strikes lighting up targets across southern Iran wherever American intelligence had confirmed military infrastructure worth removing from the board. The 8th consecutive night of strikes was already going to happen. But the 8th night was different from the 7 that preceded it in the specific language CENTCOM chose to attach to it. The word used was punish, swiftly punish IRGC forces, not degrade, not disrupt, not diminish capability, punish. For the first time in 8 consecutive nights of strikes, the American military's official communication named retribution as the explicit purpose of the operation being executed. Now, let's talk about the secret site, because this is the detail that most of the coverage has not yet been able to explain, and that carries more strategic significance than its brief mention in the available information suggests. On July 16th, one day before the Jordan attack, American forces struck a location inside Iran that was not on any public target list, was not known to the Iranian population as a military facility, and whose contents and purpose were not described in the initial reporting of the strike. The site was, according to available reporting, flattened, vaporized, obliterated. Those are not the descriptive terms used for a strike on a standard IRGC military installation whose function and contents are known. They are the terms used when a precision strike has destroyed something of sufficient significance that the result is total rather than partial, and when the target's nature is sensitive enough that complete destruction was the operational requirement rather than the incidental result. What was inside that facility? The honest answer is that confirmed public information about its contents is not yet available. What the confirmed fact of its destruction does tell you is that American intelligence had developed a targeting solution accurate enough to locate a facility that was not on any known target list, assess it as valuable enough to warrant a strike with enough munitions to achieve complete destruction, and execute that strike with sufficient precision to produce the obliteration result that has been reported. None of those capabilities are surprising given what we know about the American ISR architecture operating over Iran throughout this campaign. What is significant is the implication that there are categories of Iranian military infrastructure being prosecuted that have not been discussed publicly, that do not appear on the target lists that CENTCOM has been releasing, and that have been identified through intelligence means that are sensitive enough to require the classified target list rather than the public one. The existence of a secret target list running parallel to the public strike campaign is not surprising to anyone who has studied how military operations of this scale are conducted. Sensitive intelligence sources and methods, high-value targets whose destruction would reveal what American intelligence knows and how it knows it, facilities whose connection to specific Iranian programs is too sensitive to disclose publicly, all of these categories would naturally appear on a classified target list that operates alongside the public campaign. What the July 16th strike reveals is that this classified list is being actively prosecuted and that it has been since before the Jordan attack that triggered the explicit retribution language of the 8th night. The missile base at Al-Ghadir has been taken out. The IRGC logistics and support hub at Yazd has been bombed. The entrance to the Shahid Marzi tunnel, one of the most important transportation routes in southern Iran, was blocked in both directions. 2 bridges beyond the gorge and the outbound bridge at the Minab intersection were destroyed. The American strike campaign in the aftermath of the Jordan attack is not just hitting military hardware. It is systematically attacking the physical infrastructure that allows the IRGC to move people, equipment, and logistics from the Iranian interior to the coastal theater where the straight confrontation is being fought. Caved-in tunnels, destroyed bridges, bombed logistics hubs. These are the strikes of a campaign that has decided the military hardware it has been hitting for 8 consecutive nights needs to be accompanied by the destruction of the physical connective tissue that allows the IRGC to repair, resupply, and reinforce the positions that the hardware strikes have been degrading. A military force that cannot move its logistics cannot sustain operations. An IRGC position on the southern coast that cannot receive replacement missiles because the tunnel connecting it to the interior has been collapsed and the bridges along the alternative route have been destroyed as an IRGC position operating on whatever inventory it already has in place, with no ability to replenish that inventory until the transportation infrastructure is rebuilt. Rebuilding caved tunnels and destroyed bridges takes months under peacetime conditions. It takes considerably longer when the engineering assets required to rebuild them are themselves being targeted, and when the security environment does not allow for the sustained civilian construction presence that major infrastructure repair requires. Now, let's talk about the new Supreme Leader's statement. Because what Mojtaba Khamenei said in response to the American strikes following the Jordan attack is the single most revealing document about the internal state of the Iranian regime that has been produced in this conflict, and not for the reasons the regime intended when it released it. The statement accuses the United States of repeated violations of the Memorandum of Understanding. It calls American strikes proof of the worthlessness and unreliability of American diplomatic commitments. It describes the American government as the great Satan revealing its true face. It promises unforgettable lessons for the American enemy and the achievement of greater disgrace for the United States. It was delivered in written form, attributed to a supreme leader for whom no verified video exists, no authenticated audio recordings have been released, and no confirmed public appearance has been documented since February. The new supreme leader of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the nominal head of state of a country at war, is issuing statements without providing any evidence that he is alive to issue them. Read that carefully, because it is the most significant indication available in the public record about the actual state of the Iranian regime's leadership structure. A government with a living, present functional supreme leader does not issue written statements through intermediaries, while keeping that leader completely invisible and unverifiable for months during the most acute military crisis in the Republic's history. The visible absence of the supreme leader from the public record of this conflict, at a moment when his physical presence, his demonstrated vitality, and his personal command authority would be the single most powerful counter-narrative available to the regime against the perception of institutional collapse, is itself the most powerful evidence available that something about his situation makes that visible presence impossible. The IRGC generals, the ones who appear in baseball caps in crowds trying to remain anonymous in their own country, the ones making operational decisions that contradict the diplomatic signals the political layer is sending through Qatari intermediaries, the ones who made the decision to fire the missiles that killed Americans in Jordan, are operating in a command environment where the supreme authority their institution is supposedly answerable to is functionally absent. An institution whose supreme commander is invisible is an institution whose command coherence depends entirely on the internal power dynamics of the competing factions below that commander. And the internal power dynamics of the IRGC, as revealed by every piece of available evidence from this conflict, are not producing coherent strategic direction. They are producing an institution that simultaneously kills Americans and begs for a ceasefire, attacks civilian water infrastructure and sends diplomatic signals through Pakistan, launches ballistic missiles at Jordan, and releases wrongfully detained American citizens as gestures of goodwill. The specific decision to attack Kuwait's desalination plants deserves to be examined with particular analytical weight, because it represents a crossing of a threshold that even the most aggressive previous phases of this conflict had not reached. The IRGC has been attacking military infrastructure, commercial shipping, and American military positions throughout this conflict. All of those targets, however problematic and however contrary to the regime's public commitments, had some relationship to the military confrontation being fought. Attacking the infrastructure that provides 90% of a country's drinking water to its civilian population has no relationship to any military objective that can be analytically identified. Kuwait's desalination plants do not contribute to American military operations. They do not support coalition strike packages. They do not provide intelligence to American targeting systems. They provide water to the people of Kuwait. Targeting them is the operational choice of a military organization that has concluded that making the civilian population of an allied state suffer is the mechanism by which American political will can be eroded, and that the civilian population's suffering has more strategic value as leverage than any remaining military target the IRGC is capable of reaching effectively. This is the specific logic that defines terrorism as distinct from military operations, not the scale of the violence, the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure for political effect rather than military effect, and the regime that issued a statement about American deceitfulness and wickedness while simultaneously targeting the drinking water of Kuwait's civilian population is an institution whose self-awareness has ceased to function as a constraint on its behavior. The ship hijacking off the coast of Yemen, whether by Houthi forces, al-Shabaab, or Somali pirates operating in the expanded conflict environment, represents the geographic expansion of the instability being generated by the IRGC's regional strategy. The Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden are now part of the conflict's effective theater, even if the actors responsible for specific incidents are not directly under IRGC command. The proxy network that the IRGC spent decades building to create exactly this kind of distributed multi-theater instability is producing its intended effect, the sense that the conflict is expanding in ways that exceed any single actor's ability to contain it. But there is an important distinction between the proxy network generating regional instability and the proxy network achieving the strategic objectives for which it was constructed. The Houthi forces in Yemen, whatever their current operational activity, are facing simultaneous pressure from Saudi Arabia, from the Yemeni government backed by Saudi Arabia and American support, and from the United States military. Hezbollah in Lebanon has been systematically dismantled as a coherent military organization. The IRGC militia networks in Iraq have been degraded. The proxy layer that was supposed to provide the IRGC with strategic depth and deniable pressure capacity across the region is being addressed simultaneously with the direct strikes on Iranian territory, which is exactly the strategic logic of the campaign that has been executing since the opening phase of this conflict. The three converging pressure tracks that have been operating against the Islamic Republic throughout this campaign have now reached a new phase of intensity in the aftermath of the Jordan attack and the confirmed American casualties. The financial pressure track has eliminated every significant, legitimate revenue stream the regime possesses. The general license for oil sales has been revoked. The naval blockade is enforced with live fire. Chabahar is destroyed. The rail corridor to Russia and China is severed. The Karg Island oil export infrastructure has been directly struck. The underground propellant storage at Desful has been penetrated by bunker-buster munitions and destroyed in secondary explosions visible for hundreds of miles. The regime's ability to fund military reconstitution, sustain its security forces at full operational capacity, and maintain the basic economic functions that domestic political control requires is at its most constrained point since the founding of the Islamic Republic. The leadership class in their protected positions may be insulated from the personal economic suffering this produces. The institution they are leading is not insulated from the operational consequences of running a military campaign without the financial resources to sustain it. The military pressure track has now crossed the explicit retribution threshold that the Jordan attack triggered. ATACMS missiles adding a ground-launched precision ballistic strike dimension that the IRGC's air defense network was not configured to address simultaneously with the existing multi-domain American strike architecture. The Yaz logistics and support hub destroyed. The Al Ghadir missile base taken out. Tunnels collapsed and bridges destroyed along the transportation routes connecting the Iranian interior to the southern coastal theater. A secret facility whose contents have not been publicly disclosed, but whose complete destruction has been confirmed, suggesting a target category operating outside the public strike list that American intelligence has been developing and prosecuting in parallel with the visible campaign. And Pickaxe Mountain, the last significant nuclear site still intact, publicly designated by the American president as primed for the 30,000-pound answer to every hardened underground facility the IRGC built on the premise that sufficient depth meant survivability. The psychological pressure track operates through the compounding effect of all of this on an institution whose supreme leader has been absent from the verifiable public record for months, whose operational commanders are making decisions that contradict each other and contradict the diplomatic signals the political layer is sending, whose most protected underground facilities have been penetrated by weapons. The regime's planners, calculated as beyond the American arsenal's ability to deploy against them, and whose decision to kill American service members in Jordan has transformed the American military's operational posture from systematic degradation to explicit retribution, with the word punish attached to official communications for the first time in this campaign. The IRGC made a calculation when it launched those missiles at Jordan. It calculated that killing Americans would generate domestic American political pressure that would force a de-escalation, that the emotional weight of American casualties would overwhelm the strategic commitment to continuing the campaign, that the American public's tolerance for losing service members would create the political opening the IRGC needed to transition from a military confrontation it was losing to a diplomatic framework it could manage. The calculation was wrong in a specific way that reveals the IRGC's fundamental misunderstanding of American political psychology. American casualties in a conflict do not automatically generate anti-war sentiment when the population understands why those casualties occurred and who is responsible for them. When American service members die at the hands of an institution that has publicly threatened the American president, published kill lists naming American officials, fired on civilian ships transiting a safe route under a signed diplomatic commitment, attacked the drinking water infrastructure of an allied country, and launched ballistic missiles at a military installation in Jordan while simultaneously claiming to be the aggrieved party in a diplomatic dispute. The domestic American political response is not to question the wisdom of continuing the campaign. It is to demand that the institution responsible for those deaths be held accountable in terms that are visible, permanent, and commensurate with the act. 2 American service members are dead. 1 is missing. They are the 15th and 16th Americans killed in this war. They are national treasures who pay the ultimate price in a conflict whose stated objective is preventing an institution with the demonstrated values of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from obtaining a nuclear weapon capable of threatening the world. The American military's response to their deaths began within hours. ATACMS missiles, heavy fighter activity over Bandar Abbas, strikes on the Yazd logistics hub, the Al Ghadir missile base taken out, tunnels collapsed, bridges destroyed, a secret facility obliterated, and the 8th consecutive night of strikes with language that the American military had not used in 7 preceding nights of this campaign. Swiftly punish. For the first time in this conflict, the official American military communication about strikes on Iran used the word that the operational picture behind those strikes has been earning since the first Iranian missile hit the GFS Galaxy on a UN-designated safe route. The IRGC's new supreme leader, whose existence as a living, present, functional authority is not verifiable from the public record, issued a written statement promising unforgettable lessons for the American enemy. The IRGC's commanders, operating in a command environment where the supreme authority their institution is supposedly answerable to has been invisible for months, are continuing to launch ballistic missiles and drones at American and Allied positions across the region. And somewhere in the targeting chain that is executing against the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps right now, the next coordinates are already assigned. The tunnels that connected the Iranian interior to the southern coast are collapsed. The bridges are down. The logistics hub at Yazd is destroyed. The missile base at Al Ghadir is gone. The secret facility is obliterated. And the weapon that the American president has designated for Pickaxe Mountain is positioned and ready. The IRGC made its calculation on July 17, 2026. It calculated that killing Americans was an acceptable operational choice with manageable strategic consequences. The 8th consecutive night of American air power, with the word punish in the official communication, is the opening statement of what managing those consequences actually looks like. It is not the closing one. 2 Americans are dead. Their families are being notified. The next of kin calls are being made as this analysis is produced. And the institution that decided their deaths were an acceptable price for whatever strategic objective it believed their deaths would serve is about to discover that the consequences of that decision will continue arriving for as long as it takes for the American military to be satisfied that the retribution is commensurate with the act. Whatever the cardboard Ayatollah's next written statement promises about unforgettable lessons in store for the American enemy, the lesson that is currently being delivered across the Iranian interior in collapsed tunnels and destroyed bridges and burning logistics hubs and obliterated secret facilities and 8 consecutive nights of air power that just acquired the word punish in its official language, is a lesson written in the specific currency that the IRGC has always used to communicate what it considers serious. The IRGC understands force. It has never understood restraint as anything other than weakness. And the restraint that 8 nights of strikes had been exercising, the systematic degradation campaign that operated within the framework of proportional military response, has just been replaced by something with a different word attached to it. Punish. Swiftly. The fallen will be avenged in the only language the institution responsible for their deaths has ever chosen to speak.